Hello, everybody. My name is Tim Downs. I'm with Digital Infrastructure Investor. Welcome to this webinar, which I think you'll find very interesting. Today, we're talking about a regional municipal fiber network. Is it a new approach to digital infrastructure enhancement and upgrade? Joining us today, we have two fine gentlemen, David Daigle of American Dark Fiber and Aaron Baum of the South Bay Cities Council of Government. Dave, I'll let you take it first and describe what your company does and a little bit about your background.
Sure, I'd be happy to. First, thanks for having us, Tim. Glad to be here. American Dark Fiber is what's called a competitive local exchange carrier. Let's see, like many of your, members or folks that plug into what you do will understand what the CLEC world is all about. We're basically a telecommunications utility here in the state of California. We develop fiber optic networks. That's what we do. Our focus on the marketplace is narrowed down to what's called dark fiber, and we can get into that later. Essentially, what we do is we develop the network components in the public right-of-way and bring them to very interesting places. Big community anchor institutions, data centers, putting in backbone network for 5G, things of that nature. So we're a telephone company, but a very, very focused one on simply the network component piece.
Great. Okay. Aaron, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the COG?
Sure, Tim. Thanks for having us on. My name is Aaron Baum. I am a planning and program manager here at the South Bay City Council of Governments. We are a joint powers authority. Our members are we work for 15 cities here in Los Angeles County. The area that we cover, our territory, is from El Segundo south, covering all the beach cities, down to the Port of Los Angeles and the peninsula, and then inland to include Carson, and then up all the way through to Inglewood. So we are, if you will, the folks who came up with the idea of putting together this regional network, and I'm very happy to talk to you about it today.
Okay, well, thanks, gentlemen. So what I find so interesting about this project is not only that it's a regional consortium, but the cities, Aaron, maybe you can speak to this, the cities that are your constituents are kind of diverse. You have highly affluent communities, such as Palos Verdes Estates. You have almost the opposite of that in Lomita and other areas. And there's density, and there's also a little bit less density. Right. How did that factor into this network approach, or did it?
Yeah, that's a great observation, Tim. The South Bay Cities really is this wonderful, urban laboratory, if you will. We do have all of those kinds of demographic qualities, from very affluent to if you will, sort of on the other side of the digital divide. And so what our organization does is we do planning for our members. We help them to understand the opportunities and the issues and the barriers, the challenges that are out there in this world in terms of infrastructure, planning, sustainability. And that's really the genesis for this project in particular. The idea that goods and services, or services in particular, and maybe goods in the future, can be delivered through higher capacity and sort of digital innovation. And it's something that we recognize as far back as 2016. And if you want, I can get into sort of the history of it, which is which really does speak to how we came to where we are today. Effectively, it was an economic development issue, and large businesses, I won't name them, were leaving the South Bay. They were leaving from places like Texas and other parts of the United States, where there was better broadband, to be very simple about it. So it was recognized very quickly that was a problem, and then we had to figure out exactly what was the problem, and then how can we sort of address it, and that's sort of the genesis of how we got to the South Bay Fiber network that is lit, operational, and running today.
Okay, and Dave, tell us about you. how this came about for American Dark Fiber. I know that you specialize in the area, and Los Angeles and Southern California does have its own unique characteristics and constituencies. So just discuss a little bit about not just what American Dark Fiber does in the network, but how you approached this group of cities and this customer or partner, so to speak.
Well, yeah, it's got an interesting history for sure. As you know, I used to run another telephone company, a company called Freedom Telecommunications. My firm was acquired back in 2013. We developed a lot of fiber here in Southern California. We had connections from the Mexican border up to Bakersfield. And one of the things we learned along the way was access to network. Well, let's call it fiber conducive network, meaning conduits, poles, and so forth, was becoming a real issue here in Southern California. And the more you moved into dense urban zones, the more challenging it became. And through that experience, where we developed nearly 3,000 route miles of fiber here in Southern California, we began to rely on partnering with cities. What we found was a lot of the cities had existing traffic control conduits, street lighting conduits, irrigation conduits, you name it. They had towers, they had rooftops, they had all kinds of things that guys like me in the telecommunications world love to play with. So we were very successful in partnering with some cities where we deploy new cables in their infrastructure. In some cases, we provided them strands from the cables we deployed. In other cases, we gave them their own cables and we sat side by side. And after I sold my company, I happened to do a conference back in, I want to say it's 2014 or 2015, Tim. I think you'd put that on back in the day. And ahead of that conference, though, I had put together a solution that hadn't, been asked for. And that was integrating the South Bay cities all together. Lo and behold, I gave my little talk and off we went. And then, 2 years or 3 years later, the RFP came out. When I saw that, I said, I have to bid on this. And we had recently formed American Dark Fiber after Crown Castle had acquired the assets that we had built. And lo and behold, we put forth a bid when the RFP came out, and we were fortunate enough to be the winner of that award. So we saw that there was some good stuff happening in the South Bay. And what didn't exist several years ago that existed back in 2018 when the RFP was released was a coalescing of the political will of these 15 and 16 different cities that says broadband is really important. We've got to have a better solution. And that saved us, honestly, because I made the pitch and it didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, Tim, I think Dave makes a really good point about the coalescing, the bringing together, if you will, of the cities. But understand, I think the key point here is that what we found when we sort of did an inventory and assessment of our cities is that they were paying too much for too little service. I mean, it's as simple as that. From a municipal standpoint, we're talking about twisted pair. Okay, we're talking about paying literally hundreds, upwards to thousands of dollars for, maybe 50 megabytes of service. And clearly, they're when you sort of shine a light on what's not there and what the opportunities are, it became clear that that was the path to sort of to making change. And so the COG put out an RFP. We employed Magellan advisors to assist us. They still work, as a consultant for us on the project. And again, we shopped it, put it out on the street, and ADF responded in a very creative and what we think is a unique model for making this happen.
Well, explain to me, Aaron, what the commitment or buy-in or just support of the member cities is. Now, for viewers, you have to remember the Council of Governments is the umbrella organization to 15 cities. So explain, and maybe Dave, you can too, what their buy-in or what their role is in the network itself.
Well, buy-in is an interesting term. I mean, there's the sort of the real costs, of line items and budgets, and then there's sort of the, if you will, sort of the psychic costs of is this something that would be valuable for me in terms of a planning perspective? The buy-in from a capital perspective, and we'll get into this, I hope, in a little while in terms of how we finance the capital costs for this. Was solved. The COG was able to, the Council of Governments was able to sort of come up with a unique way to finance this with public monies. The real costs as a line item in a budget was a really simple sell. $1,000 a month for one gigabyte of lit service, all scalable. And in the marketplace, that is an extraordinarily competitive rate. I had IT directors here from cities big and small just sort of shaking their heads going, are you kidding me? I can get that for $1,000 a month? I'm as soon as I'm out of this contract, I am so in. The other part, though, is a little more complicated and a little more challenging from a municipal joint powers perspective or a collective perspective. And that's getting all of these cities, large and small, with their own sort of unique personalities, their elected officials who may or may not have any real understanding of what the opportunity is, what the real costs are, together on the same page. And you work that all the way backwards, all the way down to the equipment room. What do we have? What kind of equipment do we have? What kinds of services are we providing? Do we have a plan for scale? And the kinds of cities that make up the South Bay range from what we call large cities, which would be small cities next to the city of Los Angeles, but medium-sized cities that have fairly significant budgets and staff that are have great expertise and capacity, all the way down to very, very small cities who have people on board who have to contract out services for installing IT equipment, or have somebody on staff who's self-trained. So it's building that kind of a coalition, if you will, and really kind of organizing it. And I can tell you there are a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails. It takes a lot of time, and it's sort of an exercise in herding cats. But when you bring them home safe and you bring them to the finish line, it's a great feeling.
Oh, that's interesting. Dave, before we get into other operational details, why don't you explain what exactly the difference between dark fiber and lit fiber is, and what the value a dark fiber network in this case is?
Yeah, sure will, Tim. And it's very apropos, too, to understand the difference based on what we ultimately did as a model in this particular case. So, by virtue of our company name, American Dark Fiber, we are in what's called the dark fiber business. Really, it's a kind of a nebulous term that really all it means is that the fiber optic cable is not lit. It may be connected to something, but we're not the entity that actually connects the strands to the box and lights up the box. So typically on any sort of fiber-based solution, what you have is fiber in between, and that's us. We're the dark fiber provider. That fiber gets connected at the edge, whether it's at a data center, a corporate office, or somewhere else, a tower, you name it. And that fiber is connected from a fiber patch panel or fiber termination panel to some optronics. In our world, we don't provide the optronics. So we provide the media that allows those optronics to work. And so that's what dark fiber is. When you attach that fiber to those optronics and you plug in the gear and it lights it up and you create the bandwidth, that's lit fiber. So that's really the only difference. We're the media in between, whether it's lit or not, it's there. And so what we do is we empower the user by bringing them dark fiber that they can define what type of bandwidth they want out of it. In this particular case, the minimum threshold was a gig level of both internet or transport capacity. So it was a very easy thing for us to get our heads around in terms of delivering. So, however, if I may, in terms of responding to the RFP, we're still a leopard with certain spots, and those spots are dark fiber spots. So what we had to do for the COG in this particular case was create a consortium of solutions. And, we fancy ourselves as developers. And what we really want to do is provide, one of the most cost-effective developments for fiber in the marketplace. And to do that, you have to have a Class A contractor. And we have that, a firm by the name of HP Communications based out of Corona, California. They build network for virtually every major CLEC and ILEC in the U.S. They have offices all over the United States. And we also needed a lit service provider. And here in California, there was an entity called Race Communications. And these folks have a broad history of developing both rural, suburban, and urban solutions. They're one of the largest recipients of the California Advanced Services Fund in developing rural solutions. They're a fiber to the home and a commercial ISP. So in bringing the three entities together, we as the dark fiber developer, we have a quality contractor, and then we have the customer-facing service provider. We could all focus on the things we do best. And then in partnering and bridging our needs to the COG after the award, I'll say this not flippantly, Aaron and the COG made it so much easier for us because we had this community of interest. The messaging of what the COG network, the SBFN, was intended to be, meaning right off the bat, bring tangible cost benefit and bandwidth scalability to the South Bay of the Los Angeles region. Do that and, help us get in with all the cities so we can actually sell some services to them. The COG brought that to the table. So from the demand manifestation perspective, they made our lives very easy. So it was just a real pleasure for us to work through this project.
Yeah, so you got 15 anchor tenants with one point of contact, and the anchor tenants can also bring corporate customers and other types of customers to the network. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. I view Aaron and the COG, they're kind of like Dave Roberts at the Dodgers. They manage a big process for us. And, we have to do the work, but they'll make the introductions. They're very, very good at messaging what the intent behind the SBFN is. So for us, we had a very warm handoff. So when we'd go in, American Dark Fiber would, and we'd bring in Race Communications. We didn't necessarily have to re-educate the cities at that point in time. In some cases we did, but by and large we didn't. So they understood the message, they understood the value proposition from day one, and Race could get on with the business of actually, the paperwork of the services, because we obviously have to aggregate that demand to pay for the network, in an ongoing way. So the COG made it just super efficient for us. And, by segmenting areas of responsibility, we were able to bring this type of solution to the table that I don't think otherwise could have occurred.
I just echo the idea of education. And I mean, again, from the user perspective or future user perspective, that's key. That's critical. It continues to be, even as we sort of build capacity and look forward towards the applications and development of how the network is going to be used, both within cities and across cities, sort of sub-regionally in a collective fashion. And Dave's right. A lot of time and effort was spent to educate our cities from staff all the way up to the elected officials. And because we're a government agency, all of this required board resolutions and at the COG level, sub-regional level, and then all the way back into each individual specific city. So you could see that that the messaging, the what this is and why it's important and how much it's going to cost it had to be sort of there had to be a through line, and everyone had to understand it. But that's a challenge. I mean, from a municipal perspective in terms of organizing and managing these kinds of projects. But it got done. And it continues to, we continue to work at it. But as we grow and we learn, Dave is a great resource. So too are his partners. There's nothing but transparency, and and connection, in the networking sense. We meet a lot of really great folks, and the idea of that they're playing around with right now are these sort of public-private partnerships. How can we sustain this? How can we grow this? And looking back towards our cities, how can we help our cities understand the assets that they have, both on poles and in the ground, as a resource, as a revenue source for their aspirations, be it community broadband or internal kinds of services with transport circuits.
Well, it seems to me that's the grail for cities, how to leverage their own infrastructure. Has this fiber network been the catalyst of those conversations, and has that helped with further conversations, be it with rooftops or small cells or wireless or whatever?
From my perspective, and Dave maybe has his own sort of view on this. Yeah, it's the first domino, okay, or maybe the second for some cities. Uniquely, this is interesting. In order to actually cobble this network together, and the network is not all new dig. We really haven't got into the minutia of it, but it's this really wonderful puzzle of taking fiber that's in the ground and leasing it through Crown, for instance, that Dave mentioned. New digs where it's appropriate or advantageous. And here's the interesting part: is approaching cities to say to ask them the question, well, do you actually have conduit? Because we could, if this path that we have that's running right by your city hall, it would save our network a lot of capital cost if we could use it. And so, what kind of relationship? How can we organize that? How can we figure out a business opportunity for your city, and it's advantageous for the network as a whole? So uniquely, we have several examples of that that have come to pass. Where and I don't think I'm speaking out of school here. Where that's a critical network piece that comes in at a cost-effective price. And in return, the city gets a little bit of extra dark fiber they might not otherwise have had. I mean, these are kinds of deals that happen. I leave that's Dave's world. We make the handoff, and good things happen.
Well, Tim, if I can just dovetail onto that, from my viewpoint, I come from a pretty frugal background, and so we like to save money anywhere we can, but we don't want to save money at the cost of quality. And so, as I mentioned previously, we had some success in working with other cities here in Southern California in acquiring use of access to conduits where maybe some Cat5 cabling existed for traffic control, applications. And, our firm, worked out a transaction with a number of cities, I might add, where we'd wreck out or take out the old Cat5 cabling and put in new fiber. And, because we had already had that mindset when we got involved with the COG in the South Bay member cities, our motivation and our alignment of how this should work with the cities, I think resonated with the cities in that we weren't looking for anything for free. Our attitude was, hey, if you have it, we'd rather lease it from you than from the ILEC. And the fact of the matter is, cities are just a beautiful repository of access components that are very suitable for fiber optic deployments, as I said earlier. So when we went into the cities, we looked for ways, and we either looked or we ran into some construction issues that said, oh boy, this conduit's now blocked. We have a choice. Do we trench it at $125 or $150 a foot here in dense urban LA, or is there a better way? And so to Aaron's point, knowing that we were automatically looking for these type of assets in the ground, and some of the cities knew they had it, those conversations were able to happen very, quickly and efficiently. And ultimately, we ended up striking additional deals with various cities for using or for use of their assets to solve this. And to Aaron's point, we saved a ton of money for the COG who was funding this, at least the CapEx side. And, what that really meant was that we could take those extra CapEx dollars and look for other locations to deploy into that were of or that were meaningful to the COG. So hospitals, for example, or other city locations. So it's a very worthwhile thing, but we don't get it for free. We pay them a lease rate like we pay AT&T, or if they have poles, would pay the same pole attachment rate that would pay the utility company. But we also would offer them something more. Would say, hey, look, we're going to put in a fiber optic cable. You know, we like to have the integrity of our cable maintain itself. So why don't we stick a second cable in for you while we do it? And in every case, the cities love that. So they get an extra cable, we give it to them, and you know, everybody's happy.
So that leads to my I guess my fundamental question about this project. I consider it a template of sorts of what other municipal and local governments can do or should consider if they're in a similar position that, Aaron, you and the COG were 5-6 years ago when you decided you had to look for a new way to solve the problem. Is the unique template here the network itself, or is it simply the way American Dark Fiber and the COG collaborated on all of the development of it? I mean, you just explained that on Aaron's side, he helps generate demand and knowledge and education from member companies. You on the supply side are saying there's more than one way to reach the, the building or the data center. There's different ways to think about a network. It can be deployed all in one stretch. It can go hopscotch from here to there. So is that the unique template that you are just collaborative, or is there more to the project framework? You can both answer.
That's a great question, Tim. Yes, and yes would be how I would approach that. I think the one unique quality to this, I think, is again the sort of extraordinary kind of bringing together, if you will, of 15 cities, all under capacity on some sense, one sense or another, to sort of move forward into, to look at their, what their demand is and how they can address it. That's particularly unique. Again, in the body politic, in municipal governance, it's hard to get folks to sort of look up from their own sort of world, their city, and say, maybe we need to look at this sort of collectively. I think there's the financial piece to this, which is really unique in the sense that the COG and our leadership in particular approach this as trying to figure out, well, how do we pay for this? I mean, cities individually just can't afford, the capital expense of building out fiber networks. I mean, it's not, especially in this day and age with revenues sort of going south in terms of with COVID. So they took a really creative approach. They said, we have in Los Angeles County, a sales tax called Measure M, funds through a sales tax called Measure M, and they're dedicated to transportation projects. So by turning sort of the idea of transportation into sort of the virtual piece of transportation, and creating sort of this rationale around a project that can support transportation applications for municipal governments, signal sync projects, for instance, transportation demand management projects. We were able to approach our transportation authority, Metro, and request the capital expenses necessary to actually build the infrastructure, allowing for an easy decision-making process in terms of the monthly recurring costs for an ISP contract. And then to the last point, I think what's really unique about this particular project, from my perspective, I'm extraordinarily grateful for the team that we wound up picking. They are completely transparent. You pick up the phone and Dave is at the other end. He's a wealth of information and knowledge and enthusiasm for this. You can tell just by listening to him, the passion he has for this. So the hard part about sort of putting a network together, the construction of it, the selling of it, and all that, we had support from the get-go. And if I had to do it all over again, that's exactly what I would be looking for from a partner.
Dave, I'm going to throw the question back to you. Is the process and the team the unique template, or is the development of the network and the way the COG has set it up the unique template, or both, or neither?
Well, it's definitely both from my vantage point. And it really, though, if you look at the scales, it skews heavily in the formation of an alignment of interests with the COG. They were very clear about what the mission was from day one. And it aligned perfectly with our company's mission in the role of a telecommunications service provider. We're based here in Southern California. We know what the challenges are with transportation. I live it every single day. It can be brutal. And, when we learned about the intent behind the RFP being a transportation-based network, we said to ourselves, okay, this is great. We get it. We're local. We can help. We know how to build in this region. We've done it time and time again. I've spent, the last 28 years here in Southern California, and I've been fortunate to meet a lot of good quality contracting and engineering folks along the way. So we knew what had to be done, but it was the aggregation piece that we didn't have. And the COG brought that to the table. So with the primary mission being transportation, we also looked at it and said, hey, we're a telecommunications service provider. At the core of our business, we have to solve problems for customers. And those customers, well, it's great when they're government, but they're not always government. They can be anchor institutions, they can be enterprise. And here in Southern California, you have a myriad of different verticals, from DOD to entertainment to finance, you name it. Southern California is the largest manufacturing base in the United States. It's got 2 major ports. 40% of the U.S. trade comes through this region. So there's a lot of ancillary elements that come into play for us that says, okay, transportation, we get, we're local, we understand it, we know how to build in here, but how else can we benefit not just the COG, but to go deeper into the COG territory and really bridge some of those, let's call it lack of bandwidth choices areas, where there might just be the LEC or the cable company, or maybe there's both, but there's not a whole lot of incentive to disrupt the pricing scales that are sitting in those regions. So when the COG brought that piece to the table, meaning the initial funding, because quite frankly, if we went around and tried to aggregate the cities, it wasn't going to happen. We could not have made that work in a time frame that was meaningful for a deployment. The COG solved that problem. The funding behind it was quite interesting too, and I'll let Aaron speak to that, particularly as the Measure M dollars came out. And we had to say to ourselves, hey, look, we're taxpaying entity. These are our tax dollars too. So we want to make the best and highest use of those capital dollars that go into the ground. And so, we had these big pieces that the COG brought to the table that we couldn't solve on our own, yet on the, let's call it the development, the supply build side, and then on the demand resolution side, that's where we live. And so we brought that to the table. So we all had, I guess, respective swim lanes of what we do best. And so from that perspective, it worked really well. I don't know if I directly answered your question, but it needed both to work. And from our vantage point, we were the face of another consortium behind the scenes, right, as I mentioned earlier. And, I knew to build this thing efficiently, we had to aggregate construction, lit services on top of what we do. Because what we also found is most telcos, unless they're rate case like the ILECs or to a lesser degree the cable companies, but the commercial telecommunications service provider world, we're doing ROI studies on virtually every build. It's not like it was 20 years ago in the .com world, and we all know how that turned out. We have to justify every capital dollar that goes into the ground. So the COG solved big problem for us because they aggregated it, they brought some capital to the table, and then what we have to do is we had to ensure that the network went to other places where other benefits could be achieved, whether it was just tactical, low-cost bandwidth, high quality. By the way, this is not just a fiber to the home gig solution. It's not. This is a carrier-grade, full SLA, symmetric 1 gig solution, and this thing scales. 1 gig, 2 gig, 10 gig, 40 gig, 100 gig. We'll be able to scale this thing up to 400 gig, as demand dictates. So that's not an issue. So we've built our piece. The COG brought their piece to the table. Our contractor's done a wonderful job and races out swinging the bat, converting the demand opportunities.
And to that point, just to hop on this, because I think this is, what's a little understated here. Again, we're talking about a municipal broadband network, right? And Dave just told you all the wonderful characteristics and the scalability of it. We are already pushing this out, and broadly speaking, to other public agencies. So our initial set of membership and connections to the network include the Linquist Biomedical Facility and the Harbor UCLA Medical Campus, the Beach Cities Health District. So they're medical organizations that deal in the health arena. We have a water district and a water recycling plant that are scheduled for connection as well. Our Metro Transportation Authority, they're hooked up to the network too. So we're, and the South Bay Workforce Investment Board, I would be remiss if I didn't mention them. They were the catalyst to this. They were the organization that said, wait a second, we need to look at what's going on here. Way back in 2016. So they funded the initial studies to sort of figure out why this would be, how to solve the problem of folks leaving because of lack of digital infrastructure. They'll have seven locations hooked up. So you can imagine training and retraining the digital workforce of the future. A lot's going on, and it's all happening right now. We're still building, and it's happening. The applications are beginning to develop very quickly and very fast. And it's very exciting.
That is exciting. So we only have a few more minutes left, but I want you to just recap a little bit, Aaron, the funding mechanism. You said it's a transportation type of funding source, and it's through Metro. Just give a little bit about that, and then I'll ask a final question.
Well, without getting too wonky, as I said, Los Angeles County has a sales tax called, which through a measure M. Each sub-region has a particular allocation, receives a particular allocation of that sales tax, and so do cities as well. And those monies are targeted or directed to public infrastructure projects, typically transportation or transportation related. So what our Council of Governments has works a process to solicit projects from our cities for our sub-region, and which receive approval through the Metro Transportation Board as a regular planning process. We sort of reframed it for them. We said, this is a transportation project, and here's why. This kind of infrastructure can support all the sort of critical digital pieces that help our highways and our byways and our roads be more efficient, to be smarter, if you will. The smart road, the smart highways. And we reframed it like that for them, submitted a project proposal, and ultimately we've wound up with about $6.9 million, which is going directly to the capital expenses to put this network together. So from a city perspective, as I mentioned before, once this the idea of what is a network and why would it benefit me as a city was sort of out there in the world of the elected officials and the staff, and we could come to them and say, we'll pay for the network itself, the ring, the core ring, and the lateral connections right into your equipment room, and the optics, the optronics. to make this network work. All you need to do is pay for the monthly recurring costs, your ISP contract. You figure out what level of service you want, scalable, like Dave said, 1, 10, 1, 2, 10 is I think what we're offering right now, but all the way up to 100, that would be really cool. And that worked. And we're continuing to find opportunities to again build out the network itself to sites, public agencies here in the South Bay to use those monies, to completely use those monies, and then looking for the opportunity, a sustainable sort of model to continue the development of the network, applications, and also network expansion. And so, the folks at the Digital Infrastructure Investment Group, we're learning who you are. We have a working group where we're trying to sort of educate ourselves around these kinds of opportunities.
That's fascinating. I'm sure you can do a lot of stuff with 200 or 400 gigs. That's part of the takeaway. Last question. We only have a couple minutes. Why don't you both answer this for me? So back again, my conviction is your framework and your collaboration is the template for multiple cities, multiple local government to essentially enter in this digital world that they might not have the opportunity otherwise, right? There's, COVID has, if anything, shined a light on a glaring lack of infrastructure and services for a great many people. If you were in front of a group of like-minded civic leaders, Aaron and Dave, what would you say your takeaway is? What would they need to do to replicate what you've done? Is it process? Is it collaboration? Just what would be the lessons learned or the takeaway to a group of people who are saying, gee, what do we need to do what they did?
Who do you want to go first, Tim?
You go first, Dave.
Okay. Well, to me, it starts with the mission always. It's got to be a clear mission that's understood. And with that, there has to be, if you're going to do this over a regional area, you absolutely have to have a communities of interest, bench. So a group of cities, anchor institutions, enterprise, whoever's driving the need, these stakeholders have to have a seat at the table saying, this is what we need, how do we get it? And then when you have an entity like the COG, a Council of Governments here in Southern California, that can aggregate those, let's call it pain points, and say to the marketplace, how do we solve this? Which is what the COG did. Now you have a place where you can begin. And from there, the real work starts. You have to understand what those needs are up front. You have to have very capable entities who are going to bring that solution to bear. In our case, we looked at it and we said, hey, boy, we'd love to build this from scratch, but we also were realists and said, if we tried to build the South Bay network, that thing's going to cost anywhere from $28 to $35 million. And those funds aren't available, quite frankly. We weren't going to fund it, and I don't think they would either. However, we took a different approach. We have a very good relationship, for example, with Crown Castle, and we said, okay, let's be an integrator. We'll develop where we need to develop. We'll lease where we need to lease. And let's put the best cost-effective solution on the table for the COG. They bought into that message. We also had to create touch points that allow for not just quality bandwidth to be created and distributed, but we also had to create a pathway for the COG and its members to have access to just state-of-the-art services that exist today. And those you find at Tier 1 data centers. So we have Equinix and we have Evoke. Both are data center operators that have facilities in the COG region. So they have access to ADF's cabinets. When I say they, I mean the COG and their members through our cabinet to touch any type of service that exists in the digital world today. So it's a fast track way to bridge that digital divide, as Aaron talked about earlier. But it all started with an alignment of entities, a community of interest that said, we have a problem, how do we fix it?
Great.
Dave really hit the key points. It's and I would add education, because I think you have to understand what the opportunities are from a very fundamental perspective. I mean, we talk about the digital divide, we talk about fiber optic networks. When you get right down to it, that's an abstract idea. You know, there's good things on the other side of it. You know, you can play your games faster, or you can download your movies quicker. But really, what does that mean? And so, spending the time up front to educate from a municipal perspective, both staff and elected officials, is critical to this. I would also say, you know, the idea of understanding, you know, what your capacity is, sort of the inventory or assessment up front of where you are in the marketplace for IT, investing in IT, and then collaboration and aggregation. I mean, it's bringing all the stakeholders to the table. It's empowering them with knowledge. It's empowering them with facts about what's out there, and then you know, aggregating, you know, the opportunities. You know, and it's such a great space to be in. You know, you know, Dave used the old cliche, if you build it, they will come. And I said, yeah, of course they will. You know, and my phone's lighting up all the time. Well, what's the next thing we're going to do? Or how can I get more? Or I want to be part of this network. And the application side of it, you know, we started with transportation, which is great. And that there's a need for it and a rationale for spending those kind of monies for public infrastructure. That's fantastic. This is so wide and so deep, and the touch points out through our data centers, the tier 1 data centers, or even as simple as community, you know, putting a little more bandwidth in the community center for Wi-Fi to support a COVID daycare center, which is something that happened just sort of spontaneously. That's all happening. So. Exciting times, but really, you know, go through it in a methodical way. Education, aggregation, collaboration, I think are critical to getting these kind of projects done.
Hey, Tim, if I may, if I can jump in, I just have to chime in on something Aaron said. You know, one of the elements that we found coming out of this, inherently, look, we believe in the profit motive and things like that. We love that sort of world. And so we had to find a balance in working with the cities. This is public money, you know, so we had to take care of that. However, we also knew that once that network was in place, the self-interest, the dirty little secret, if you want it, is the fact that we knew that the cities, they had their fingers on the pulse of their cities. They knew where the problems were. They knew which people were squawking the most about not having what they need. And for a market-driven entity like American Dark Fiber, for us to have access to that knowledge is critical, because now we can focus our efforts on where the real demand resides, and it's down at the street level. Moreover, once we had this thing built, guess what? We're now looking at an extension from this region into One Wilshire with a high-density cable into the whole downtown LA corridor, bridging to other carriers. And all those benefits that come out of that, whether it's wholesale capacity at other places for the COG membership, we make that available to them. Once the network's in place, you can leverage it in so many different ways. We also found that Metro's got over 2,500 traffic lights in the region where they want to have cameras on them. You know, guess what? We can plug into the network. So there's all kinds of good that can come out of this, whether it's profit driven or public safety or just public driven. It's there to be used, and we embrace it, and we're excited to be here.
Well, that's great. You started as a transportation network application, and you brought it all the way back to a transportation and traffic application. So great summation, both of you. With that, we will end our 50-minute webinar. I'd like to say thanks again to David Daigle of American Dark Fiber, Aaron Baum of the South Bay Cities Council of Government. Great job, gentlemen. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.